There's a yellow sticky note curling at one corner on a bathroom mirror. 3 weeks old. 4 words in a man's own handwriting. I am calm and confident. He read it every morning while he brushed his teeth because someone told him this was how you reprogrammed a mind. Say the good thing often enough, and eventually the brain files it under true. It wasn't working. Worse than that, some mornings he came away from that mirror feeling more of a fraud than before he'd started. The note was meant to lift him. Instead, it quietly pointed at the gap between the man in the glass and the 4 cheerful words floating over his reflection. Every single reading was a small reminder of everything he wasn't. He thought he was doing it wrong. He wasn't. He was doing exactly what he'd been told. The instruction was the problem. And I want to spend the next few minutes showing you why. Because once you see the mechanism, the whole affirmation industry stops being mysterious. It becomes almost predictable. Let's start with the research, because there's a tidy little study that punctures the affirmation myth rather neatly. In 2009, a team of psychologists led by Joanne Wood ran an experiment that's become something of a quiet legend in the field. They asked people to repeat a classic positive affirmation, I am a lovable person, and then measured how they felt afterwards. Here's the twist. For people who already had high self-esteem, the affirmation gave a modest lift. Fine. Predictable. But for people with low self-esteem, precisely the people the whole affirmation industry is selling to, repeating I am a lovable person left them feeling worse than a control group who'd done nothing of the sort. Their mood dropped. Their sense of self-worth dropped. Read that back to yourself, because it's the whole point. The people who most needed the lift got pushed further down. The cheerful sentence, aimed at exactly the wound it was meant to heal, made the wound ache more. Now, that's not a quirk, that's a mechanism. So let's look at it. Your brain is not a notice board you can simply pin new beliefs to. It's a prediction engine. Every waking moment, it's comparing what it's being told against an enormous archive of what it already holds to be true. And it flags instantly anything that doesn't fit. So when a man who feels like a fraud stands at that mirror and says, I am calm and confident, he isn't quietly overwriting an old belief. He's staging a confrontation. The statement enters his mind, gets checked against 3 decades of lived evidence, and comes back stamped false. Loudly. Psychologists have a name for the discomfort that follows: cognitive dissonance, the friction of holding 2 contradictory ideas at once. I am calm and confident sits in one hand, and the shaking, the avoidance, the dread, that sits in the other. The mind can't tolerate the contradiction, so it resolves it. And here's the cruelty of it. It almost always resolves it in favor of the older, better evidenced belief. The affirmation doesn't win. The doubt wins. Think about what that means for every repetition. Each time you say the grand thing, your mind helpfully produces all the reasons it isn't so. You're not training confidence, you're rehearsing the counter-argument, you're doing reps, but of the rebuttal. Which is why the bigger the gap between the statement and your felt reality, the worse it works. I am a multimillionaire, said by someone in debt, isn't aspirational. It's an invitation for the brain to itemize the overdraft, line by line. Underneath all of this sits a belief that simply doesn't survive contact with how a brain actually works. The idea that repetition alone reshapes reality. Say it enough, and your subconscious rearranges itself to match. It doesn't. Belief isn't changed by volume of repetition, it's changed by weight of evidence. A sentence with no evidence behind it, no matter how many times you say it, stays a sentence. You can repeat, I am a confident speaker 4,000 times. But the first time you stand up to speak and your voice shakes, your brain throws the whole affirmation out and trusts the shaking instead. Direct experience always outranks rehearsed words. Always. Now, I know how that sounds. Bleak. But it isn't a reason for despair. It's the door out. Because if belief follows evidence, then the route to changing a belief is to manufacture the evidence deliberately. In small doses, your mind can't dismiss. So let's drop the mirror chance. But, and this matters, let's not drop the underlying idea that the stories you tell yourself matter. They do, enormously. Most people's inner stories are crueler and less accurate than they'd ever realize. We just stop using a tool that trips the brain's lie detector on every single rep. 3 replacements do the real work. The first one, believable reframes, not bold declarations. The fastest fix is to stop making claims your mind can reject and start making ones it can accept. Don't say I am calm and confident when you plainly aren't. Say something true that points in the right direction. I'm learning to handle pressure better than I used to, or I've handled hard things before and I can handle this. Notice what happens there. There's nothing for the prediction engine to argue with. I'm learning is unfalsifiable and it's honest. I've handled hard things before is backed by actual memories your brain can pull up. The statement clears the lie detector, so it lands. And instead of dissonance, you get a small, real settling. That's the heart of it. A believable reframe beats a bold affirmation every single time because the brain only ever updates on what it doesn't reject. The second replacement, process affirmations, not outcome affirmations. There's a useful distinction here between affirming an outcome you can't yet evidence and affirming a process you can actually control. I am successful is an outcome and a contested one. But I show up and do the work even when I don't feel like it. That's a process, and you can make it true by lunchtime. The research on this is genuinely encouraging. Process-focused self-talk tends to improve performance, where outcome-focused self-talk often doesn't, partly because it directs your attention to the controllable next action, rather than the gap to some distant prize. Affirm the rowing, not the destination. The destination tends to take care of itself. And the third, evidence through action. This is the deep one. The deepest change doesn't come from language at all. It comes from doing the thing, badly, briefly at a scale too small to frighten you, and letting your brain watch you do it. That nervous man at the mirror, he didn't talk his way to confidence. He spoke up once in a low-stakes meeting, survived it, did it again the next week. Each small act deposited a real coin in the evidence account, and after enough coins, his brain quietly revised the belief on its own, not because he commanded it to, but because the evidence finally outweighed the doubt. No mirror required. The new belief wasn't asserted, it was earned. So here's the honest version of all this. The affirmation industry got one thing right and one thing badly wrong. Right. The stories you tell yourself shape your behavior, and most people's inner stories are far crueler than they deserve. Wrong. That you fix this by shouting the opposite into a mirror. You don't argue a brain into a new belief. You out-evidence the old one. You hand it reframes it can accept, processes it can control, and small actions it can witness. And then you let it draw its own conclusion. It's quieter than a mantra, slower than a sticky note, but it holds, because it was never a lie in the first place. And that really is the whole through line of everything I do here. Real change isn't a magic word, it's a mechanism. Once you understand the mechanism, the tools stop sounding like platitudes and start sounding like instructions. If this is the kind of self-development you've been looking for, psychology with the mechanism showing no woo, no magical thinking, then join The Rebuild, my newsletter, where I unpack exactly this sort of thing, one practical idea at a time. The link's in the show notes, and if the show's earned it, follow along wherever you're listening. This episode was narrated by an AI clone of my own voice, trained on this show.